and this idea of government and legislation has come up a couple of times, and I think there's a really important role for government and legislation. The challenge is in a global industry where one of my products, the cotton came from Senegal. It was shipped through France for some reason. I still don't know why it went through France, but then ended up in Pakistan to be spun into yarn. That yarn then went to China. It went from China in fabric form into Sri Lanka to be dyed, and then also turned into garments, and then arrived into the UK. Now that is not a unique picture in terms of the fashion industry, and that is the way it operates. And so we have this transboundary issue around legislation. Really difficult so we run the risk of setting standards that we have in the UK and saying to the rest of the world, like the UK did 100 years ago, these are our standards, everyone has to follow it. A very colonial sort of view about how it works. And who's to say that our standards are right and someone else's standards are wrong? And a classic example of that is the Modern Slavery Act, which was introduced in 2015. And this is not just about fashion, this is modern slavery legislation across all industries. Mainly to do with lots of agricultural issues that happened in the UK. But what the Modern Slavery Act is saying to industry, to your company, so if anyone in here runs a company that's over £36 million in size, anyone got a 36? No? Okay. One day, yeah. Any company over £36 million in terms of turnover has to comply with the Modern Slavery Act. To comply with the Modern Slavery Act, you have to make a statement about what you're doing on modern slavery for your supply chain. The government, in terms of its legislation, hasn't defined what they mean by supply chain. I could decide that my supply chain is the garment makers only in my supply chain, and I'm ensuring that there is no modern slavery in those factories. Because I might sign up to ETI, I've probably ticked all the boxes already for that, so I don't need to do anything. I may be another brand who decides actually that I'm going to take responsibility for my supply chain that goes all the way down to the cotton producers that may be in Senegal in that supply chain that I talked about. How do I ensure that modern slavery doesn't exist in those countries? Because when I go to those countries and say, by the way, I use some of your cotton, you don't know who I am, but I use some of your cotton in my product, do you have modern slavery? And they go, I have no idea what modern slavery means, but how many tons of cotton do you want to buy? So we've got these real challenges around the transboundary aspect of the industry. The other challenge with government legislation is, are there any politicians in the room? They don't understand the industry at all. And they don't understand the dynamics of industry. So if you're not compliant with the Modern Slavery Act, the consequences are the government doesn't do anything. So you're not compliant with law, and I can see where this is going now. I've got this image of Boris not following law. Stay away from that. But if you don't comply with law, the government doesn't do anything. And what the government has said within the legislation is the consequence of not complying with law is society, NGOs and civil society will take you to task. So government is relying on NGOs and civil society to follow up on the legislation. It just doesn't happen. So I totally agree that legislation and government action is needed. It's trying to be really intelligent with that action to make sure we get the results that we need across a very, very complex and difficult sort of supply chain, supply network that covers, is global.